Hi, my name is Marilyn, and I recently found out that there is a place in Queensland where you can picnic with alpacas. Helpful information to know for later. My hope for this faith feed is that you might be able to find some points of connection with the story that I'm sharing, and that hopefully some of the learnings that I've encountered in my life might find some relevance and meaning in yours. Before I begin, I just also wanted to acknowledge the land on which I'm meeting from. I too am meeting on the land of the Darug people, and as we've gathered to share and learn our stories today, may we walk gently on this land. So, I have this memory of my last day of year 6, just before the final school bell rings for the day. I got so overwhelmed that I ran away from my classroom, the amphitheater, which was our school gathering spot. I find a quiet, shady place to catch my breath, and as soon as I am fully covered under the shade of these little hedges, everything around me stops. I can't tell if I'm angry, upset, or just sad. I look around me, and all I'm thinking about is how it took me years to feel comfortable in this place, to find some friends, to figure out the things I was good at, who I wanted to be here, who I wanted others to see me as. And then as that final bell rings and I see parents come to pick up their kids, I see my classmates walking down for the last time as students of St. John Vianney's Doonside, and it hits me. A mixture of panic and sorrow. And I realize this is where everything changes again. Now, there are two things I've always known about myself. The first being that I've always been afraid of change. And the second being that I've always been eager to take on responsibility. And for most of my life, I thought that these two things were a constant, almost unchangeable. Almost. Somewhere over the last 3 years, these things were challenged. And as they begin to change, I wonder more and more about who I am. Right now, I find myself in a new place physically and metaphorically, and I'm pretty sure of two things. The first being that I am eager for things to change. Actually, I need them to. And the second being that I wish I didn't have to be the person responsible for the change that I am seeking. Now, full disclosure, I'm not here tonight to share with you some epiphany of mine. I've got no answers or solutions to any of the struggles and mysteries people might be facing. I do, however, want to share my lived experience with you, in the hopes that you might connect with me on some of my learnings and observations, and maybe even some of my struggles. At the end of 2019, I made a big, somewhat spontaneous, and pretty poorly planned decision to move out of home. Now, many people would say, Marilyn, moving out of home during the first week of a global, unprecedented pandemic is a horrible idea. And to those people, I say, I know, but I did it. So, and actually, it was something that I had been thinking about for a while before I had haphazardly made the leap. And I'll never forget the day I decided to commit to it. I am a part of the Young Christian Worker Movement, the YCW, and one day I was at an event and I just wasn't in a great headspace. I wasn't in a great place. So I did what anyone in an uncomfortable situation would do, and I ran away from my problems instead of facing them head on. As I was crying on the train home, I promised myself that something had to give. Something needed to change in my life, and for some reason, I decided that moving out was it. The only thing I wanted to do in that moment was run to my mom. And even though we haven't always been on the best of terms, I could think of no better person than to share my heart with, knowing that she'd hear and see me and that she'd comfort me. And I just wanted to cry in bed with her. And then, after a good cry, I'd ask for her support. Now, most days, I find myself torn between wanting to be a leader who could bring about some meaningful and positive change, and then someone who just wants to be as far away from most human beings as possible. Currently, I find myself on this journey where I'm trying to figure out who I am and the way in which I contribute to the world. And honestly, sometimes I just wish I knew that stuff already, so I could get straight to it and not have to wait through all of this uncertainty. All I know I do have at the moment is 1, a very stubborn will to help bring people together in the face of fear and uncertainty. 2, a determination to see the world be better, especially for those that it needs to be better for. 3, a curiosity to do with why things are the way that they are. 4, a confusion as to why change is so hard to achieve. And 5, a persistent existential crisis that has had me constantly thinking about all of these things for most of my young adult life so far. It's just like that last day of year 6, and I'm revisiting all of those emotions and fears again. I'm sinking into this void, thinking that nothing will ever be the same. At this point, I'm just at the beginning of year 6, and I'm dreading beginning year 6, my final year in primary school, before I have to go to high school, and I begin to think about how quickly change comes. Before I know it, I'll be in high school, then uni, potentially traveling the world, starting a family of my own, losing contact with my dearest friends, feeling like time will slip by me, and before I know it, I'll be 80, attending the funerals of friends, family members, even my brother's funerals, and I'll feel alone and heartbroken. All this I'm carrying, and at this point in my life, I'm thinking, I haven't even started high school yet. But I know someday how much I'm going to miss them. But back then, in that moment, when my whole life seemed to be flashing before my eyes, it was hard to move to a place of gratitude for what I had, especially for the people in my life. What was instead brought on by this existential crisis was an immense fear. And it's only years later that I realized that was a fear of loneliness and insecurity. And honestly, I've never felt this more than during this pandemic. I've also never missed my family more than I do right now. It reminds me of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prays in the garden, hoping that God will find another way. "Let this cup pass from me," he exclaims, "but only if it is your will." I imagine he was scared, anxious, hoping for change, but prepared to accept what will come. He comes back again to his disciples to find them sleeping. How lonely he must have felt when they couldn't keep awake with him. In moments of pain and fear, sometimes all you want is to be in the company of others who remind you that you aren't so alone. I guess it is important for us all to think about that. Who are the people that we crave when we go into these moments? I'm talking about the people who don't just remind you that you aren't alone, the ones who sit with you in that place of discomfort and loneliness. Now, there have been many points in my life since where I've revisited those fears, and often they take different forms and manifest in different ways. The most common being absolute paralysis, a fear of failing others, wanting to please everyone, no matter the cost to myself and my well-being, and a lack of self-confidence stemming from the belief that I just wasn't capable of achieving anything. I remember my mom getting ready for work, cleaning the house like crazy, absolutely stressed out and dreading having to go into work. She didn't just not like her job. She was terrified, anxious about people treating her horribly, unsure what danger the day might bring along. She worked in transport and just wanted to get the job done so she could provide for her family. It wasn't her dream job. She had studied economics and had a degree, but this country didn't recognize her qualifications, and she had kids to feed. So she found a stable job with good benefits for the family, but it weighed on her mental health. Now, I knew there were days where she felt unsafe, and I never asked because I never asked if it was because of the color of her skin or her accent, if that's why people treated her differently, and I couldn't really understand her fears. But as a kid, it's hard to comfort your parents in those moments. Instead, you get angry or resentful even when you don't mean to. And witnessing my mom go through this on a regular basis, I mean, it's not enough to say that I respected her more for it. It's not that. It frustrated me. It continues to frustrate me to this day, to the point of wanting to create a world that would uphold my mother's dignity and her beauty. Throughout my life, the manifestation of my fears have always impacted my decisions and actions. From being too afraid and self-conscious to put myself out there, to say what I think, even to challenge what others have imposed on me. As a young Australian-born Southeast Asian-ish girl, there are many things about how people have treated me or other women in my family that I just never questioned. And as a society, as a community, we don't talk about this stuff. And we certainly don't encourage our young people to challenge the status quo or empower them outside of the usual rhetoric around being a successful person in a certain career path or being financially stable. This, in my experience, is a common rhetoric within migrant families. Now, I've always wanted to make the world a better place. In many ways, I believe this is my life's purpose. I remember the first time trying to tell my parents that I wanted to be an environmentalist, and I couldn't even say the word, let alone spell it. There are many different iterations of my sense of purpose before I realized that it was more than just a career path I would choose. I've come to understand now that this sense of purpose, of mission, that what others might understand as a sense of vocation, that it would be intrinsic to my very being. At my very core, this is what I believe I'm here to do. This sense of purpose, it's porous throughout all elements of my life, my relationships, my day job, my hobbies, my volunteer commitments, my spirituality, and the very practice of my faith. It pulls me to a place of action that follows through the words that are spoken as ideals. A practice that brings to life theory and philosophy so as to make them less abstract and more a way of life. Had I known from a young age what this would mean for my life, I think I would have been braver, more resolute, more determined, spoken, stubborn, definitely more agitating. All of those fears that have had a hold on me for so much of my life would have been replaced by one: the fear of not having tried. I think my worldview and my personal sense of purpose always sort of threw off my migrant parents. And I know now that they were afraid for me. They knew me, and they knew how difficult my life would be if I committed it to bringing about some idealistic change. They have lived very difficult lives, having sacrificed so much for my brothers and I. They moved to a new land in the hopes of better opportunities, and in the process, they discovered their place in our world systems of oppression, inequality, and racism. All they've ever wanted for me is to live a better life, to not get caught up in the messiness and pain associated with not conforming or succeeding in society. And I have always felt at odds with their aspirations for me. I mean, it's hard enough to go on and want to live a perfect life when that doesn't exist, not for myself and not for anyone. I see my parents struggling and suffering still, just to survive. And sometimes I feel that guilt again. I feel guilty for not just being grateful for their sacrifice and living that life that they have dreamed for me. But I truly believe that I do a disservice to my parents by choosing a comfortable and convenient life, choosing to remain compliant and accepting of the systems and institutions that continue to govern their sense of worth and dignity. I mentioned it before, of the few things about myself which I am sure of. One is that I am eager for things to change. I need them to. I want to make a better world for my mom. I want to be a part of the movement to restore the dignity of each and every human being, even if that means going up against some of the systems and people who have always benefited from her struggle. My biggest fear, and the driving force for my cascading series of existential crises, is the thought of being alone. And even if I had everything in the world, a perfect life, it would mean very little to me if the people I love aren't there with me. Similarly, I need to surrender my own privilege and recognize that the job isn't done until everyone can live a full and meaningful life. I imagine myself looking at that 12-year-old version of myself. I see that young girl wondering if she'd be brave enough, resolute enough, determined, outspoken, stubborn enough, more agitating. And to that fearful girl, apprehensive about change and responsibility, I hold her in all her fear and whisper to her the wisdom with which my years of wondering and trying and failing and aspiring has taught me. Be afraid of only one thing: the fear of not having tried.